and daven that the fruit of our learning should help to bring home all the rest of the hostages and protect our soldiers and Am Yisrael and all of the innocents and bring a speedy end to all of our conflicts.
Amen.
So we're going to have to go back a little bit, I think, just to keep our head in the sugya. So we began this sugya with the Mishnah that said, we did the first part of the Mishnah earlier about the Ubara Shehiricha. Now we're doing the second part of the Mishnah about the Choleh. And so we had the Mishnah that said, Choleh ma'achilin otavti b'ki'in. And then we had the statement of Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Yanai said two things. Michael Schwartz, why don't you read Amar Rabbi Yanai?
I'm sorry, I got mixed up with the buttons here. Amar Ravi Yanai, Chole Omer Tzurich, Rofe Omer Eno Tzurich, Shomim LeChole. My timer, Levi De Marak Nafsho. Bashita, Mahuditema, Rafa Kimle, Tafi Kamashman Lan.
Okay, so what's the first part of Rabbi Yanai saying?
So if the sick person says they need to eat, and the doctor says they don't need to eat, we listen to the patient, the sick person. What's the reason? It quotes a pasuk that says the heart knows the bitterness of the soul. The Gemara comments, well, this is obvious, but it says you might have thought that because the doctor is the doctor, knows better. You might have thought that we would listen to the doctor, but the Mishnah teaches us otherwise.
Well, or Rabbi Yanai comes to teach us otherwise.
I'm sorry, Rabbi Yanai comes to teach us otherwise.
Okay, so the first case, Rabbi Yanai, is a case where the Choleh says, I need to eat. And we're bearing in mind that the Mishnah doesn't tell us one way or the other about the Choleh. Mishnah just says, Choleh ma'achilin oto api b'ki'in. So the way we understood that is that if somebody is sick on Yom Kippur and they need to eat. Now it doesn't say if he says that he needs to eat or other people say he needs to eat, but in any event, we say that if there are bikiin, if there are experts there, that we feed him according to the experts. So Rabbi Yanai says, in the case where the Choleh says explicitly, I need to eat, and there's a doctor, one doctor who says he doesn't need to eat, then we listen to the Choleh because Lev Yodea Marat Nafsha. Even though we might have thought that we'll go after the doctor because he's the expert, he knows more, but nonetheless. Okay. And then we have the second part of Rabbi Yanai. So Michael Schwartz, continue reading.
Rofe Omar Tzurich, V'cholei Omar Eno Tzurich, Shomim LeRofe, Ma Taima, Tunva Hu Dinakit Le. So the doctor says that he needs, and the patient says that he doesn't need. We listen to the doctor. What's the reason? Because the sick person could be speaking nonsense, could be delirious, I think is what Michael said.
Yeah, right. We're in the case where the doctor says he needs to eat, but the Choleh says he doesn't need to eat. We listen to the doctor because we'll assume that the patient, the Choleh, is delirious. Okay, so that's Rabbi Yanai. So then the Gemara brings our Mishnah, and it breaks down our Mishnah. So Michael Werner, you can read Choleh.
עולה מהלכין אותו על פי בקעין, על פי בקעין אין, על פי עצמו לא. על פי בקעין אין, על פי בקי אחד לא.
Okay, so what is that?
So a sick person is fed on the basis of the opinion of doctors in the plural. On the opinion of doctors in the plural, yes. On the opinion of the sick person himself, not. So it's a conflict between what doctors in the plural is saying, probably two or more doctors saying it, and what the sick person says, we feed him. And if doctors in the plural say that he doesn't need to be fed, say that he does need to be fed, and one doctor, we feed him. But if only one doctor says that needs to be fed, we do not feed him.
Okay, so these are the diukim, these are the things that we derive from a close reading of our Mishnah. So what's the problem with now that I've read the Mishnah this way? What problem do we have, Gemara?
This is interesting. This is introducing the issue of doctors in the plural, which was not in the Mishnah.
What's our problem? What did the Gemara say right before it brought this Mishnah and broke it down? What did Michael Schwartz read? Okay, we just read it. We read Rabbi Yanai. What did Rabbi Yanai say?
If the patient wants to says he needs, and the doctor says he doesn't, then we listen to the patient.
Uh-huh. And what else did he say? Rofei Omer.
So if the doctor says he needs and the sick person says he doesn't need, then we listen to the doctor.
Okay. And how does that contrast now with my understanding of the Mishnah?
I mean, it's not necessarily in clear contrast because the Mishnah is referring to doctors in the plural, and Rabbi Yanai is referring to singular doctor.
Well, okay, so hold on a second though. So how is that a problem then for Rabbi Yanai?
Well, this is not doctors in the plural is not something that he's clearly considering.
Okay, so first of all, Rabbi Yanai says that Rabbi Yanai says that in the case where there's one chole and one doctor, we're always going to end up listening to whoever says he should eat, right? That's the sum total, because if the chole says he needs to eat, and the doctor says he doesn't, we listen to the chole. If the rofei says he needs to eat, and the chole says he doesn't, we listen to the rofei. But based on our Mishnah, what would we have said?
We should listen to the doctor.
Okay, so first of all, we not that we listen to Bikiyin.
Doctors in the plural.
According to the way we read the Mishnah is telling us that we're going to go after the doctors when there's more than one doctor, and presumably it doesn't matter what the chole thinks. If there's two doctors that say he needs to eat, then we feed him. If there's one doctor that says he needs to eat, then we wouldn't feed him. So the Mishnah is a problem for Rabbi Yanai. That's our problem. Rabbi Yanai the Mishnah doesn't seem to agree with Rabbi Yanai. So the Gemara answers. Michael, we're going to continue reading. Hacha b'mayas ki.
Ach b'mayim eskinan, demar lo tzarich, tzarichna.
So what is that? What is that?
So what is this Mishnah referring to?
Okay.
It's referring to an instance where it is said that the patient does not need to eat.
The Amar lo tzrichna. What happened? Who said what?
When either
No. Who said what? There's only one right answer. What do the words mean? Just what do the words mean? The Amar lo tzrichna.
It is said, in a case where it is said that
No. Amar.
said.
The
It is
Amar, right? That he said. Not
that
that it is said in a passive form. Amar, he said. Lo tzrichna. What did he say?
the patient said he does not need to eat.
He said, right. He said, lo tzrichna. Ani lo tzarich. That's what the words mean. And now you can say with confidence, who said that?
Actually, you know what? It could be either Baki Echad or the Hole Atzmo.
No. It can only be the cholet. Why? I just explained the word. What does tzrichna mean?
Okay, right. He needs to eat.
No. What does tzrichna mean? What does the word mean? I just told you. What does it mean?
I'm sorry. I'm not.
Anyone?
It means I need.
It means I need, right? So, right, that's the na at the end. It's like it's a kitzur of saying lo tzarich ani or ana. Ana in Aramaic is the same as ani in Hebrew. So he said, I don't need. It's not that it was said that it wasn't needed. It's literally, it means he said, I don't need. So that's what the Mishnah is talking about. So the Gemara is answering our question. And it's saying, what is the Mishnah talking about? Right? The Amar, where the Choleh said, I don't need. It has to be the Choleh because he's the only one who would say, I don't need in the first person. It can't be talking about the doctors. It's only talking about the Choleh. All right. That's what the words of the Gemara mean. So now, before we go on, so let's plug that back into the Mishnah. So this is the quote from the Mishnah. Now I'm reading the Mishnah as if to say, Poleh amar ani lo tzarich machilino to al pi b'kiyin. That's how I'm reading the Mishnah. So when I read the Mishnah to begin with, we didn't know what the Choleh said. We just said somebody was sick. And then if two doctors come and say that he needs to eat, then we feed him. But now I'm being more explicit. I'm saying the Choleh said, I'm sick, but I don't need to eat. And then what does the Mishnah say in that case?
If two medical experts say he needs to eat, we feed him.
Then we feed him. Okay, so how does that help us? How does that help Rabbi Yanai to reconcile with the Mishnah?
It's talking about, Rabbi Yanai only talks about, the patient only overrules one doctor. if he says he needs to eat, but the Mishnah says that, okay, it refers to two or more than one doctor.
What did Rabbi Yanai say about a person who said, I don't need to eat? Because that's what the Mishnah is talking about now.
All right.
So, all right. So don't make it complicated. Make it simple. Choleh says, I don't need to eat. I feed him according to Bikiyin. What did Rabbi Yanai say in that instance?
Actually, yeah, we would feed him according to according to Rofet, because he might be delirious. We assume
Okay.
that
So
at least two prophets, Bekim.
okay, so we've answered in a sense one problem, but not two problems. So first of all, we can say Rabbi Yanai could understand this part of the Mishnah, right? He understands the Mishnah to mean, or will understand for Rabbi Yanai, that the Mishnah means that it's a choleh who says, I don't need to eat. And the Mishnah says that we can feed him according to the word of two doctors. So that helps Rabbi Yanai, because he at least agrees with part of that statement, which is when the choleh says, I don't need to eat, and the rofeh says he needs to eat, then we listen to the rofeh, meaning we feed him. But now, of course, we still have a problem, as Paul points out, because the Mishnah says, the Mishnah now reads that if the choleh says, I don't need to eat, I can feed him if two bikiyin say. So it's still a problem for Rebbe Yanai. It's just that we've taken it down a notch. So now, Paul, you can read the next part, the lisfule.
Lispu, what? Lei al pi baki, lo tzricha, ve'ika acharina, בהדיע דאמר לא צריך.
Okay. So do you remember what this means? Velisfule al pi baki. Okay, so velisfule means, so let us feed him according to a baki.
A single doctor.
A single doctor. In other words, if now you're reading the Mishnah to say, it's talking about a choleh who says, I don't need to eat. If I would, based on what Rabbi Yanai says, I should feed him according to one baki and not two baki.
Mm-hmm.
So, lo tzricha. No, I still need the Mishnah to tell me this case. The ika achrina bahadeh, because there's another one with him that says he doesn't need to eat. So there's another what with whom?
Another doctor. Another person.
Yes, there's another doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And he says he doesn't need to eat. And so
they don't agree. There are two doctors, but they don't agree.
But they don't agree. So I need the Mishnah to tell me that I would still feed him. So
there must be two doctors, but at least one of them thinks that he has got to eat him.
Yes. So hacha b'mayas kinan. This goes back to the first couple lines earlier. So we had the problem. Our Mishnah says, "Choleh machilin oto al pi b'kiyin," and Rabbi Yanai said, and that seems to disagree with Rabbi Yanai, right? Hacha b'mayas kinan da'amar choleh lo tzarich. So our Mishnah is talking about a case where the choleh himself said he doesn't need to eat. And our Mishnah is coming to tell me that I listen to the Rofim. So on that, the Gemara asked, the Nisu al pi baki. So let's feed him according to an expert. Daha be'echad nami amar Rabbi Yanai, Shomin l'rofeh. Right? Based on Rabbi Yanai, the Mishnah should have said, okay, Cholet should have just said, Machlinoto pi baki. So the Gemara answers that no. So it must mean that there was, the Mishnah has to be talking about a case where there was another doctor. So there were two doctors, but one said he should eat, and one said he shouldn't eat. And so we're going to say that the Mishnah tells us that even so, I'm going to feed him. So machilino talpi, I can understand that to mean that machilino talpi bikiyin, I feed him according to bikiyin, meaning even when there are two bikiyin that disagree, I'm going to feed him. Okay.
That's
So the Mishnah-
strange. It's really strange.
Explain.
It's- what it says that you need one doctor. One, but if you have the opinion of one doctor that he has got to he the sick person refuses to eat, yes.
He doesn't
And-
refuse to eat. He just says, I don't need to eat.
Okay, he thinks he doesn't have to. Mhm. But you need only one doctor, but he shouldn't be alone, even if the other one doesn't think like him. It's very strange.
But no. It doesn't. So the way we would understand it now is not that you have to have another doctor that disagrees with them.
No,
But it
no,
means
the
that
other doctor can
even
also agree that not everything is okay.
you also
Yeah.
what it means is in the case where there are two doctors that disagree, and the choleh himself says, I don't need to eat. Nonetheless, I'm going to feed him according to that doctor.
And if there's only one doctor,
Yeah.
it's not enough because they say that you have to have Biki in.
So what the Gemara is learning now is that no, you don't have to have two bikiyin that agree. It means that even in the case where there are two bikiyin and they disagree, I still feed him. Okay. Don't worry, we're still going through this. It's not the final word. So okay, so Paul, ma'chilino tal pi bikiyin.
איפה אני? מאכילים אותו על פי בקיעים, פשיטא. ספק נפשות הוא, וספק נפשות להקל. לא
Okay, so
צריכה דאיכא תרי אחריני בהדיה.
Bahadeh.
בהדיה. דאומרי לא צריך.
Okay, stop there. So, machilino tal pi bikiyin pshita. Now that's obvious. Why is it
Okay.
obvious? Safek nefashot hu v'safek nefashot lahakel. What does that mean?
נפשות are persons, but yeah, I don't know.
And
Well,
this is,
no.
This is a doubt in a matter of life or death. And in a doubt in a matter of life or death, we rule leniently.
Yeah. So machilino tal pi bikiyin. Okay, but that should be obvious because it's safek nefashot. In other words, even in the case that we are now saying that the Mishnah is talking about, where there's a doctor who says he should eat and doctor says he doesn't have to eat, it's still safek nefashot.
It's like Safek Nefashot is like Safek Pikuach Nefesh.
Yes.
This is what
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. So the term pikuach nefesh, we learned that from the mission that we're going to get to in the not too distant future. It'll take a little while for us to get there, but we're about 2 daf away. That we learn the case of pikuach nefesh, but the general term is safek nefashot, right? So when somebody's life is at stake, then we're mekil. So we're mekil even in this case where there's a doctor who says he doesn't need to eat, but there is so the case that we've established now is the choleh says I don't need to eat. There's a doctor who says he doesn't need to eat, but there's a doctor who says he does need to eat.
Then he has got to eat.
He still has to eat. So I say, but now I say pshita, okay, but that's obvious because safek nefashot lahakel. So Gemara says, lo tzricha. No, I still need the Mishnah to tell me this because of the case of what? The ika trei achrine bahadei. I need it for the case, the ika trei achrine bahadei, sheyesh shnei achirim ito. There's 2 doctors. Amri lo tzarich. What, in other words, now I'm changing the calculus. So until now I said, okay, safek nefashot, when I had 1 doctor against 1 doctor, and the choleh, as it were, counted himself out because he says, I don't need to eat. So now it was 1 doctor against another doctor. So then I said, machilinoto. And then I say, but that's obvious. Obviously, you're going to do it because it's still a safek. It's pikuach nefesh. It's a safek. In other words, in that case, I could say it's a
safek pikuach nefesh.
I could say it's a safek shakul, right? I could say it's an even safek. It's 50-50 because I have 1 doctor who says yes and 1 doctor who says no. So now I'll say no, but I still need the Mishnah to tell me machlinato pi bikiyin when there are 2 against him. What if I have 1 doctor who says that he needs to eat, but I have 2 doctors who say he doesn't need to eat? Nonetheless, I'm still going to feed him.
No, I didn't understand. If the 2 doctors say he doesn't need to eat, then he doesn't need to eat.
Yeah, no, there's 2 doctors who say he doesn't need to eat.
Yes.
Against 1 doctor who says he does need to eat.
Now you mean there are 3 doctors now?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what it says. The ika trei achrine bahadei. Right. So now, before I said the ika achrina bahadei, that there's another doctor with him. But now I'll say no. In order to make sense of the Mishnah, I'll say it must mean that there were 2 doctors against him.
Okay.
So when there are 2 doctors against him, I might have thought, okay, it's not a safek shakul. Now it's 2 against 1.
Yes.
But nonetheless, I'm going to say,
it's
nonetheless,
still safek pikuach nefesh.
It's still
if 1
safek.
doctor says that he has got to eat and 2 say that he doesn't, it's still safek.
It's still safek. Okay, so but that's the chidush. And why is that such a big chidush? Because of this next part, the afal gav. Okay, so Michael Schwartz.
The afal gav the marav safra, trei kamea v'mea katrei, hani mile li inyan idut, aval li inyan omdana batar daot deot azlinan.
Okay, what does that mean?
Despite this, Rav Safra says 2 is like 100 and 100 is like 2. These words are in when we're dealing with testimony, witness testimony, but for the issue of estimating, we go after the majority.
Okay, and keep reading. V'hane mile.
V'hane mile li inyan umdana demumana avahacha safek nefeshot hu. So these words are for the estimating in monetary matters, but here where we're dealing with life and death, there's a doubt. I can't think of the phrase. There's a doubt of whether the person will live or not.
Okay, so actually, yeah, so stop here. So so the Gemara introduces Rav Safra because we want to understand the way we're trying to learn the Mishnah now. We're saying the case is the Choleh says, I don't need to eat. And there's a doctor who says you do need to eat, and there are two doctors who say you don't need to eat. So, as Paul said, okay, but it's still safek nefashot, and right. So even though the calculus has changed, but nonetheless it's still safek nefashot because there's still one doctor who says he needs to eat. So
there might even be 100 who say they don't. About among 100, one would say you have to eat, and the other 99 would say you don't have to eat. You nevertheless have to eat.
Nevertheless, have to eat. Okay, but okay, before we get to that extreme case, but we'll say so. Ba'af al gav the Amar Rav Safra. So even though Rav Safra said that 2 are like 100 and 100 are like 2. So then what would that mean? It would mean if I thought that statement was applicable to our case of the Choleh on Yom Kippur, and the tray here, the 2, would be the doctors. So then I would think that Rav Safra, when he said tray kamel, mea tray, he would be saying that the 2 doctors are the same as having 100 doctors. And so in that case, I might say that, in other words, their 2 opinions now have an unbeatable strength. Once I have 2, that's it. Once I have 2, that would be enough then to say, maybe then I might think that's enough to say this is no longer safek nefashot. I might think that. But I say, Afal Gav Damar Rav Safra Trei Kamel Mea Katrei Hane Milinyan Edut. So first of all, when Rav Safra said that 2 are like 100 or 100 are like 2, he was saying that not about our case. He was saying that about a case of Edut, of testimony. And once you have 2, right, because the Torah requires 2 witnesses for a court case. So once you have 2 witnesses, that's solid edut, and there's no difference now between having 2 edim and 100 edim. Aval umdana, but when it comes to making an evaluation, a property evaluation, batar deotazlin, I would go after the majority opinion. So then, in other words, maybe you'll think that the implication of Rav Safra is okay, trei kamei katrei. That'll only be by edut, but the implication is, but when it comes to things that aren't edut, like umdana, making an evaluation, then actually I go after the rove. And then I might think that that would be applicable here, that I have 2 that say he doesn't need to eat, and 1 that says he does need to eat. Vahane miling and umdana de mamona. But what we learn from Rav Safra is that the 2, then when there's 2 against 1 in umdana, that's evaluating for property, for financial reason. Avahacha safek nefashot. But in the end, our case is talking about safek nefashot, and it's safek nefashot. The safek nefashot overrides all of these other considerations. And so the chidush is, as it were, the chidush is that when I have 2 against 1, 2 who say he doesn't need to eat, and 1 who says he does need to eat, what the Gemara is saying here is I don't take into consideration the way the numbers work in other areas, right? So when in Edut, once you have 2, that's it. That establishes whatever you're trying to establish. Okay, so this isn't edu, but maybe you'll think it's like umdana. But then I say, okay, and in umdana I go after the rov. It's not that two establishes. It's like I go after the rov deot. But here I'm saying, okay, but this is also not like umdana de mamona. This is safek nefashot. Safek nefashot, we're mekil. Okay. So actually, I should have separated this out to be a new kata, but it doesn't matter. Michael Schwartz. Now, read the imain sham biki'in.
Im ein sham v'ki'im, makilin oto api etzmo. B'klal derisha de amar tzarich.
Okay, stop. So that's a kasha.
Okay.
So imain sham biki'in makilin oto api etzmo. Where's that from?
That's from the Mishnah.
Okay, and what does it mean?
That if there's no experts around to judge, then we listen to him, we feed him according to his word.
Okay. And so then the kasha is Michal Duresha de Amar Tzarich. What is that?
So it implies that the first clause, the first section of the Mishnah, they're talking about a case where the Chole says that he needs.
Okay. So first, so we have let's make sure we understand the kasha of the Gemara. What's the kasha here? First of all, Michal Dereisha Damar Tzarich. This implies that like you say, the first clause of the Mishnah is talking about a case where the Choleh said, "I need to eat." First of all, how do I get that from? What's the diuk? How do I get that from these words?
If because if there were experts, we would feed him according to the word of the expert. So it must be that he's oh no that oh no no that so in the second clause it's saying that he needs, and therefore so the first clause is also that he needs.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Because look, let's go back and look at the Mishnah, which is way back. Here we go. Our Mishnah is here. Cholem achirino to pi bikiin, v'imein sham bikiin machirino to pi atzmo. So, what's the implication? So, if there bikiin there, we feed him according to the bikiin. If there are no bikiin there, we feed him according to himself. So, in the second clause, imein sham bikiin machirino to pi atzmo, what is the choleh saying?
He's saying he needs to eat.
He's saying he
I want
needs
to eat.
Right. He's saying, I need to eat. I want to eat. So what does
Because
that tell you
if
about
he doesn't want, there's no question.
Okay, right, exactly. And so what
Except
does
if there's a doctor who understands that he does have to eat. But if
Okay,
there's no
so-
doctor, so
Okay, so what does that imply then about the first clause, though? If there are no doctors there, we go according to what he says he needs.
Mhm.
Okay, and so what does that tell you about the case when there were doctors?
That he's saying he doesn't eat, because we listen to the doctors who say he has to eat.
No, I would say I understand what you're saying, but what the Gemara is saying now is that no, the Pashtus is both clauses are talking about a choleh says he needs to eat. Both clauses, because if there aren't bikin there, in other words, the only difference between the first clause and the second clause, as it's presented in the Mishnah, is whether or not they're bikiin. That's the only difference that's presented. Right? So if that's the only difference, I know for sure in the second clause that he must be saying, I need to eat. Ergo, that's what he said in the first clause. So I understand from the Seifa that the Reisha is also talking about this case where the Choles said, I need to eat. That's the Gemara's understanding now. The Gemara is saying the second clause implies that the first clause must be the same. The only difference is whether or not there are Bekiyin there. That's the only difference. So if that's the only difference, then I have a problem. What's my problem? What was I saying until now that the Reisha held?
We were saying that he says he doesn't need to eat, and we went through this whole thing about how we listen to the doctors and the detail.
Right. So now so the Gemara says, okay, look, you've done this very nice job, like Michael said, like we did this whole thing, and we said, okay, so you want to say because we have this issue with Rabbi Yanai, and we were trying to reconcile Rabbi Yanai's statements with the statements of the Mishnah. So the way we understood our Mishnah was, in order to reconcile with Rabbi Yanai, we said the Mishnah, when it says Chole machinot bebikiin, that's talking about a case where the Chole says, I don't need to eat. And then I only have the bikiin to rely on. But a simple reading of the Mishnah would tell me that your reading of the Mishnah is not correct, because the Mishnah presents itself in such a way that I have to conclude that the Reisha is talking about a case where the Choles says, I do need to eat, right? Machino to piatzmo, michal de Reisha de amar tzarich. Since the second clause says that we feed him according to his own desire, his own claim, that implies that was also true that he was also saying ani tzarich in the Reisha. And if that's true, then everything that I said before is not correct. In other words, I'll be back to the same problems that I had with Rabbi Yanai in the Mishnah before. So the Gemara says, Michael Schwartz, continue reading. Chisuri mechsera.
Chesuri mechsra vehechi katani amadavrim amorim de amar lo tzarich ani aval amar tzarich ani ein sham bekin trei elechad amar lo tzarich machlino to al pi etzmo.
Okay, stop. So you explained this last week. What is chisure mechsura? What does that mean?
It means there's some words that are missing from the Mishnah.
Okay, so chisure mechsura, there's a missing part that's missing, v'hachi katani, and so this is how we're going to learn the Mishnah. And then how are we going to learn the Mishnah? So continue. Bamed dvarim amorim.
And this is what it should have said. He says that I don't need. That it says if I don't need, but he says that I do need, and there's not two doctors there, but only one, and he says that he doesn't need. We feed him according to, and the doctor says that he doesn't need. We feed him according to the word of the patient, the sick person.
Right. Okay. Let's. I had actually thought to lay this out for you, but we'll just do it as it is. So in other words, the Gemara is now saying as follows: when the Mishnah said, there are words that are missing right after that. And the words that are missing are Bamed Varim Amurim, the Amar Lo Tzarich. אבל אם אמר צריך, then אם אין שם בקיין, מכריעין אותו על פי עצמו. So it's adding in words to the Mishnah. You might ask, how can the Gemara add words into the Mishnah? Actually, I wanted to do a little bit more research on this before this year, and I didn't get a chance. As I recall, there are differing opinions amongst later Mefarshim about what Chisurei Mechsura means. Does Chisurei Mechsura mean that there are, in other words, that it's an emendation. It's saying there's a problem in the Girsa of the Mishnah, and we through our logic and our discussion, we have reconstructed what must have been the original Mishnah. That's one way of looking at it. And another way of looking,
you can do anything.
No, you can't do anything. You still have to have a reasoned argument. In other words, they're not just willy-nilly putting words in the Mishnah. They're putting words in the Mishnah now because otherwise the Mishnah seems to be self-contradictory, or it doesn't line up with the way that we've learned it because of Rabbi Yanai. And I'll remind you,
with the Torah, you can't do such a thing.
With the Torah, we don't do such a thing. You mean with Mikra?
Okay.
With Mikra, yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the Chisurei Mechsura Hachiktani, either it means that we're reconstructing words that we're missing, and so the Girsa must be fixed. We have to fix it, or it means that even without fixing the Girsa, but there's a thought process that's missing that we will supply, right? But either way,
the Amoraim could say Hachigar Sinan. I thought
so
only the late commentators could say something like this, but
no. But we see that, in other words, so they didn't use the term Hachigar Sinan, but they do use the term Chisurei Mechsura V'Hachiktani. In other words, if by reasoning out the understanding of the Mishnah, we understand that the Mishnah doesn't hold together, it doesn't make sense, but it would make sense if we understood that there's a part missing, then we can reason that that part is missing and we will add it in. That's the Chisurei Mechsura. So Chisurei Mechsura V'Hachiktani. So now I'm going to read the Mishnah like this. I'm going to say, Koleh. One second, let's get back to the place. So the Choleh who says, I don't need to eat, then Machilino Tal Pi B'Kiyin. And then I can plug in my understanding of that, which is that if there's one Baki who says he doesn't need to eat and one Baki who says he does need to eat, or even if there's one Baki who says he needs to eat and two Baki who say he doesn't need to eat, I will still feed him because Safek Nefashot Lahakel. But Aval Amar Tzarichani. But what about the case? In other words, that whole case is talking about a case where the Choleh says, I don't need to eat. But in the case where the Choleh, to begin with, says, I need to eat. If there's no one to consult, I'm sorry, Ein Sham Bikiyin Trey. There aren't two Bikiyin to consult, right? Because the way I learned the ratio of the Mishnah is that there's at least two Bikiyin. And even in the case where they disagree with each other, I'm going to go after the Mekil. But let's say there aren't two Bikiyin. But there's only one Baki. And he says, you don't need to eat. Machilino al pi atzmo. I feed him according to himself. And so now with this, now I can say that our Mishnah lines up with Rebbe Yanai, right? Michael Schwartz. So how does it line up with Rebbe Yanai? What did Rebbe Yanai say?
So Rabbi Yanni said that if he says, I don't need to eat, and the doctor says he does need to eat, we listen to the doctor. And if he says that I do need to eat, and one doctor says he doesn't.
Rebbe Yanai only talked about one doctor, right?
Okay.
He says,
yes.
Go ahead.
So if he says that, no, I'm confused. If he said that, I had it. If he said that I don't need to eat, and the one doctor says he does, then we feed him according to the doctor. And if he says I do need to eat, and the doctor says he doesn't, we still feed him we still feed him if it's one doctor.
Right. Okay. And so now I could say that lines up with the way we've ultimately learned the Mishnah. So the Seif of the Mishnah tells me that even if there's one doctor, right? So you may Ein Sham Bikin Trey, there aren't two doctors there. Elachad, even if there's only one who says that he doesn't need to eat, nonetheless, Machilino Tal Pi Atzmo. And that's just like Rebbe Yanai. So all right, so to summarize, this is what we've got. So this is our summary so far, that if there is a chole and on Yom Kippur, and the chole says, I don't need to eat, and there are two doctors there, and one of them says he needs to eat, and one of them says he doesn't need to eat, or even if there's one who says he needs to eat, and two who don't say he doesn't need to eat, we feed him because safek nefashot lahakel. But in the case where the choleh himself says, I need to eat, so if there's a doctor there who says he doesn't need to eat, we still feed him according to his own testimonies. That's what we're up to now. But now, Michael Werner, you're going to read Mar Baravashi.
Rav Ashi Omer, Kol hecha de amar zarichani, afilu eka mea de amre lo zarich. L'didia sheminan shene emar lev yodea amarat nafsho.
Okay, so what does Mar Baravashi say? Kol, first if you don't know a word, say I don't know this word. Kol hecha da'amar tzarichani.
So every sick person says, I need to eat.
So what does hecha mean? Do you know what that means? If you don't know, say I don't know.
I don't know.
Okay. It's important to say you don't know when you don't know. It's really, really important. So kol hecha in this context would mean every place, right? Every place, in other words, in any event, the amar tzarichani, that he says I need to eat. So in any place where who says I need to eat?
The sick person.
Okay. Anytime that the sick person says I need to eat, afilu ika mea da'amri lo tzarich. What does that mean?
Even if there are 100 doctors, dechiim, who say that it does need to eat.
Okay. V'didei shma'ina.
We listen to the patient.
Okay.
Um,
Do you know? So Lidide means to him.
To him. Okay.
Okay. And what does the word ika mean?
It's like yesh, no? Even if there
It's
are.
exactly like yesh. That's what it means. Ika, it means yesh. Afilu yesh mea da'amri mea she'omrim lo tzarich. Even if there are 100 doctors who say he doesn't need to eat. Lididei shma'ina. Nachlu shomim lo. We listen to him. Shenemar leiv yodea marat nafsho. So here, Mar Baravashi lays out very clearly what? What's his din?
His din is that if the patient says that he needs to eat, we feed him even if there are 100 doctors that say he doesn't need to eat.
And you were about to say, and you can now I'll let you expand. You were about to say, regardless of
the number of doctors who say otherwise.
right. So because the 100 is not a precise number, it's there as a guzma. It's there just to say, there could be 100, right? So there could be 1,000, there could be 1,000,000. It doesn't matter. Okay. How is Mar Baravashi any different than what we've learned so far?
What we've learned so far would seem to suggest that 2 or more doctors would overrule the patient in this instance.
Okay, so we actually had the case of 2 against 1. In which case?
So we actually, so the case is 2. So in the case that we've examined so far, it was 2 doctors against 1 doctor. And if the 1 doctor says that the patient needs to eat, we feed the patient because there's safek nefashot, even if it isn't safek shikul.
Okay, safek shakul. So in that case, in which case was that? So let me be more precise. The Mishnah, according to the way we read the Mishnah now, there are broadly speaking 2 cases. Case number 1 is where the Choles says, I don't need to eat. Case number 2 is where the Choles says, I need to eat. So in case 1, where the Choles said, I don't need to eat, then I said, even 2 doctors against 1, 2 say he doesn't need, and 1 says he does need, even 2 against 1, I will feed him. What about the case where the Choles said, I need to eat? Then what do I do? According to what we learned until now. Go ahead. The way I learned until now is to say, I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you. Go ahead.
I mean, thinking back to what Rabbi Yanai said, we would feed him if he says that he needs to eat, regardless of
what did we say the Mishnah said?
Oh dear.
Okay, the Mishnah said, "Imen sham bikiin machilino tzal pi atzmo." So the Mishnah in that second case, where it said the Choles says, and I understand that part of the conclusion is that I understand. Obviously, that's talking about a case where the Choles says, "I need to eat," because machilino tzal pi atzmo. So that's in a case where there were no bikiin. What about a case where there were bikiyin? So Mar Baravashi says, Kol hechadamar tzarichani. In any instance where he says, where the Choles says, I need to eat, it doesn't matter how many doctors disagree with him, I'm still going to feed him, right? In other words, the Mishnah didn't actually talk about this explicitly, because the Mishnah, when we were talking about the numbers of doctors, That's in a case where the Choleh himself said, I don't need to eat. But in a case where the Choleh says, I need to eat, so then I could say it's a kol shekain. In other words, in the case where the Choleh says, I don't need to eat, and a majority of doctors, even a minority of doctors say he needs to eat, I feed him. And now I'm saying, even if all the doctors say he doesn't need to eat, if he himself says, I need to eat, I feed him. So this is something that wasn't mifurash until now. Till now, based on the Mishnah didn't actually talk about this case. The Mishnah talked about a case of the Choleh says, I need to eat, and there were no bikin there to consult. And Mara Bar Vashi says, it doesn't matter. Even if there are bikin, we still feed him.
So in case the sick person thinks that he has to eat,
Yes.
the doctors are not relevant at all. It doesn't matter if they are 1 or 2 or 3 or what they think. It's just not relevant.
Right. According to Marba Ravashi, it doesn't matter. Once the Choleh says, I need to eat, we feed him.
So the whole discussion about Bekim is only in the case somebody doesn't want to eat, although he is sick.
Right. In a case where he says, I don't need to eat. Right. And then I have this question about how to consult the Bikiyin. But if there's a Choleh who says, Ani tzarich, then it doesn't matter how many Bikiyin say against him, we feed him.
By the way, you don't even know if he's sick. Maybe he just doesn't feel very well. Things which happen.
Okay, but what do we say? Lev yodeh maras nafsho. I think it's important to point out that the assumption here is what? About the Choleh. The assumption is that the Choleh is a good Jew and he wants to fast on Yom Kippur. Because look, if it's a Jew who's in any event isn't going to fast, it doesn't matter, right? The Gemara and the Mishnah are not talking about such a person. If he says, look, I'm not going to fast anyway, and I'm not feeling that well, I'm going to eat. But he'll eat even if he's feeling well. So the lo baba cheshbon, right? That's not really what the subject of the Mishnah is. The Mishnah is assuming that the person who's there, he knows it's Yom Kippur, and he knows he's supposed to fast, and he still says, tzarichani, I need to eat. And so, based on his own testimony about his own condition, we will feed him. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says a couple of interesting things here.
But by the way, you need, in case he doesn't want to eat, you need anyway doctors to understand that he is ill. Maybe the person doesn't want to believe he is ill. So you need a doctor to say, oh, you are ill, you have to eat.
I think that's a good point, right? In other words, it's not just that the person says, I don't need to eat. And, in my lifetime, and maybe you either or any of you have had this experience also, where there'll be a person who says, no, I don't need to eat. And we're looking at them and we see that they really need to eat, and they're not, they want to be like a martyr, they think they're being machmir on atzmam, and we see that they need to eat. But who are we to say? So I think Paul's point is important, that people, that there's a need for bikiyin, especially in the case where he doesn't want to eat.
So I recall there's an instance in one city that I was living in where there's a very, very severe heat wave on the day of Yom Kippur.
Right.
And it's a community where they just would not get shearing. Like shearing would just be beyond their ken. And so the rabbi actually got up in the pulpit and said, okay, I order you all to drink.
There is this, yeah, Rav Savitsky told me a story. I think it was Rav Actually, I think I heard this story from more than one person. And I'm not going to be able to tell it accurately, but I believe it was Rav Chaim Brisk, who was Rav Soloveitchik's grandfather, where it was a similar case. I don't know that it was a heat wave, but there was, I think that there was a general lack of food and people had barely been eating at all. Oh, no, I think I don't have this with me. I think actually Rav Soloveitchik brings this in his book, Isha Halacha. I think he brings this story where Rav Chaim ordered the people to eat on Yom Kippur, very in a similar fashion. He knew that they needed to eat, and he told them they had to eat on Yom Kippur because that's the point. Is that the Torah tells us this is this whole thing about Safek Nefashot that the Torah tells us you have to fast on Yom Kippur, but we learn from other sources like V'chai Bahem, the Lo Shiamut Bahem, that the Torah wants us to live, right? In other words, that it's more important to the Kadosh Baruch Hu that we survive in order to continue doing more mitzvot in the future than to do this one mitzvah. So in that case, the mitzvah becomes that you have to eat. That's the mitzvah. Mitzvah becomes that you have to eat. And we're going to get into that more, as I say, when we get a little bit further in the sugya. Like the sugya from here on in, for the next few daf, we're going to be talking about questions about the cholesh sheyesh bo sakana, and even a goses, right? Somebody who's on the edge of death. These are all practical issues, right? It's not like they're always practical issues, including these manazim. In the last few minutes, let me just, I'm going to read Rashi and then we'll stop for today. So Rashi says, we did that last week, we skipped Safra. Michal Deresha Amar Tzarich, right? So we went through this whole thing in the Gemara where we said, because we want to understand Rabbi Yanai in light of the Mishnah, or the Mishnah in light of Rabbi Yanai, we said that the Resha of the Mishnah is talking about a Choleh who said, Choleh said, I don't need to eat, right? But then the Gemara said, but when I learned the second part of the Mishnah, it implies that the first part of the Mishnah was talking about a Choleh said who said, I do need to eat. Michal Deresha Damar Tzarich. Vafilu Hachi Katani Matnitin Al Pi Bikin. And nonetheless, the Mishnah says, Al Pi Bikin in. I still, even when he says, I need to eat, I need Bikin to feed him. Al Pi Bikin in. Al Pi Atzmo Lo. Right? And that's unlike everything that we learned until now. So the Gemara answers, Bamed Dvarim Amorim. So what is the mission really talking about when it says Choleh Lachinot Al Pi Bikin? Right? Bamed Dvarim Amorim Da Amachinot Al Pi Bikin. Klomar Deba'in and Bikin. When does it mean? What is the Mishnah talking about that it says that you need bikin? The Amar lo tzarich. When do you need bikin? Only when the Choleh said, I don't need to eat. But Amri bikin tzarich. And then the bikin come and say, no, he does need to eat. So then I feed him. But if he says, I need to eat, im ein sham bikin trey, the amri lo tzarich. If there aren't two bikin there who say he doesn't need to eat, elachad, that there's only one baki there, machilinoto al pi atzmo. I feed him according to what he said. Ki Rabbi Yanai. the Amar Shomin L'chole. So you see Rashi bin Furash, he's explaining that the Gemara here is trying to explain the Mishnah in such a way that it lines up with Rabbi Yanai. And then Mar Barav Ashi Amar, so that's the last Ma'amar we had. And I'll just point out, so I'm sure I pointed out before, Rav Ashi is considered to be one of the editors, like the final redactors of the Talmud Bavli. So Mar Bar Rav Ashi, so Rav Ashi's son. So this is a very late Deya, right? This is like at the end of the Gemara. Chronologically, we have the Deya of Mar Bar Rav Ashi. So Mar Bar Rav Ashi says, Hach Sefer lo tefaresh achi. Don't explain the Sefer the way you explained it. The mashma dehecha damar tzarich ani, v'ika trei da'amri lo tzarich lo tzaitin le. Where you're learning the end of the Mishnah, right? That the Cho is saying, I need to eat, and Ein Sham Bikiyin, then I listen to him. So what's the implication? If there were Bikiyin there, I would listen to them. So he says, don't learn that, right? In other words, the mashma, the sefer of the Mishnah, the way you're learning it implies that where the Choleh says, I need to eat, and there are two, in other words, there are two doctors who say he doesn't need to eat. Lo tzaitin le, I don't listen to him. I don't listen to the Choleh. Ha lo amrina. We don't say that. The Hech Damar Tzarichani, where he says, I need the fil ika mea da amri lo tzarich, tzaitin le. Even if there's 100 who say he doesn't need to eat, we listen to him. My time, lev yodei amarat nafsho, because ultimately, lev yodei amarat nafsho. So the conclusion then in the Gemara will be like Mar Baravash, and not like you may have it extrapolated from the Mishnah, because the Mishnah says that im ein sham bikiyin. If the Choleh says I need to eat and there are no bikiyin there, I listen to him. Mashma, that if there were bikiyin there, maybe I would listen to them. So Marbar Ravashi says, no, that's not the din. The din is, I always listen to the Choleh when he says I need to eat. And that's a good place for us to stop. Next week, we're going to continue. In the Gemara, right? So I'll just read. We're achingly close to the end of the sugya, but this will take too long to go through. So I'm just going to read it. Tanan, we learn in a Mishnah, right? So we're still coming back to the Mishnah. Ein sham bikin, machurino to al pi yatzmo. Tama deleka bikin. So what's the reason I feed him according to his word? Because there are no bikin. Ha ika bikin lo, but if there are bikin, then no, I wouldn't feed according to him. I'd feed him according to the bikin. So hachikam, this is how the mar lo tzaricha. When do I say what I said? Where he said I didn't need to eat. Amar tzarichani, ein sham bikin klal. If there are no bikin there at all, machirino to al piyatma. Shneimar lev yodei amarat nafsho. In other words, the Gemara here, when it brings the Mishnah, is asking a kasha on Mar Baravashi. Because Mar Baravashi does seem to go against the Mishnah. And then it brings the Teirut. And so we'll examine this next time. So yeah, anyway, it's a good place to stop. Any last words or comments? Okay, very good. Bezrat Hashem, I'll see you next week, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll see some more hostages
That's a shame.
freed.
All right. Good night. Thank you.
Go
Thank you.
to